PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to an edition of Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Reilly, and this has been an episode that unfortunately has to be done. This is an episode that I feel like a lot of Golden Knights fans, they either knew was coming or eventually wish it wasn't going to have to happen, but it has happened. Longtime fan favorite, Reilly Smith. He is no longer a member of your Vegas Golden Knights. It was announced that the Pittsburgh Penguins would be acquiring Reilly Smith. Vegas Golden Knights would be getting a 2024 third-round pick back in the deal. And, it's really interesting to talk about Reilly Smith, what his impact has been on your Vegas Golden Knights. So this episode really is just going to mainly be kind of saying thank you to Reilly Smith, because his 6 seasons playing for the Vegas Golden Knights, he was a major deal. He was a huge impact player for your Vegas Golden Knights. Not only was he a great player on the ice, but he was also a great person for the city of Las Vegas. He had a huge part in the community. He did a lot of good here in Las Vegas. We will talk about the certain event that he did every single year, and he's going to continue to do here in Las Vegas. He did every summer. We'll talk about that here on the show later on. But before we get into that, I just want to give you a quick rundown. I want to give you kind of a breakdown on who Reilly Smith is. What Reilly Smith did, how he got to Vegas, how he got into the NHL, how he performed as a member of your Vegas Golden Knights, and more importantly, I want to discuss, will Reilly Smith go into the Golden Knights Ring of Honor when the time comes? When everything is done and over with, will he be in their Ring of Honor? So let's kick this off. Reilly Smith originally came from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And in fact, he actually played in the minor nationals in Toronto when he was a kid. He racked up 157 points back in the 2006-2007 season. So even as a youngster, Reilly Smith was making an impact in the city of Toronto. Then he goes on. He eventually, a few years later, joins college hockey and becomes a Miami University Red Hawk. And in his 3 seasons playing for Miami University, year 1, he only had 20 points in 44 games. Year 2 got a little bit better, had 54 points in 38 games. And his last season playing for Miami University, Reilly Smith had 48 points in 39 games. Now, in between the time that he played for Miami University, Reilly Smith would get drafted into the NHL. As in 2009, in the 3rd round, taken 69th overall, nice, Reilly Smith was taken by the Dallas Stars, and that's actually where he started out his career. Of course, he was taken in by a legendary Hall of Famer and Joe Nieuwendyk, who was the general manager of the Dallas Stars at the time. So he played a few years in Dallas, and as a matter of fact, his stats in Dallas was not so bad. His first 2 years playing in Dallas, year 1, he had 30 goals, 48 points in 39 games when playing there. And then in year 2, in 37 games for the Dallas Stars, 9 points in the NHL. But then in the AHL, had 35 points in 45 games. So he was averaging a little under a point per game in the minors. And then when he came to the NHL, he was, about a quarter of a point per game. Then he also was in the playoffs in the AHL for the Texas Stars. And in that season, he had 4 points in 7 games. And, his 2 years playing for the Dallas Stars organization, once again, 40 games, 9 points. So he wasn't having a great start to his career. I mean, 2 years in, like I said, 9 points in 40 NHL games. So the Dallas Stars and the Boston Bruins, they decided to shake things up. And indeed, they shook it up in a good way. As the Dallas Stars and Boston Bruins, they made a significant trade. And the trade goes as followed. The Dallas Stars get a future superstar in Tyler Seguin. They got Rich Peverly, who was an established veteran, and Ryan Button, who was a guy in the minors. And the Boston Bruins end up getting 4 pieces in the deal. They had Joe Murrow, who was an up-and-coming guy. You had Louis Eriksson, who was already an established player in the NHL. Matt Frazier was an up-and-coming guy. And Reilly Smith, who was an up-and-coming guy at the time. Now, this trade was a win for the Dallas Stars because Tyler Seguin was a second overall pick in 2010. So 3 years later, getting dealt to the Dallas Stars, he was supposed to make a big impact in Dallas. And for the Boston Bruins, I mean, this team got to the Stanley Cup final a year after this trade. And 3 of those 4 players were on the Stanley Cup final roster for one of the Boston Bruins later that time. So they did get some value out of this trade with the Tyler Seguin deal. Now, I will mention that Reilly Smith, he only spent 2 seasons in Boston. Okay? He spent only 2 seasons with the Boston Bruins, but his performance in Boston was getting better and better and better every single season he was in the NHL. So in 2013, 2014, playing for the Boston Bruins after getting dealt from the Dallas Stars, Reilly Smith had a 20-goal season for the first time in his NHL career, putting up 20 goals, 51 points, which was also a career high for him at the time, for the Boston Bruins in the regular season. Then they get to the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2014, and in 12 playoff games had 4 goals and 5 points. Not bad for his first time being in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Hashtag Vegas Hockey Hub. Hey, shout out to Josh Bailey. Stay tuned live. I highly recommend watching his stuff as well. San Jose Sharks fan, as much as I know you, San Jose Sharks. So shout out to Josh Bailey. Okay, well, let's do this now. Okay. Yeah, it's live, folks. Anything can happen. But let's get back to the whole Reilly Smith situation here on Vegas Hockey Hub on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Reilly. Like I said, it happened, folks. Technical difficulties. Everything happens for a reason, especially talking about Reilly Smith. But so 2013, 2014, he really had his breakout season for Reilly Smith with the Boston Bruins. And a lot of people said that was kind of his celebration, his homecoming situation with the Boston Bruins. His second and final year playing for Boston, 2014, 2015, a very valuable year for the Boston Bruins, as this was the year they made it to Stanley Cup final, going up against the Chicago Blackhawks. So when it came to Reilly Smith, in 81 games, he had 13 goals and only 40 points. So he took a step back from what he did the year before. And in the playoffs, when it came to Reilly Smith, he put up, like I said, about 5 points in that postseason, 4 of them being goals. So Reilly Smith, with his tenure of being a Boston Bruin, having 91 points, being part of Boston in 2 seasons, that is not bad for an up-and-coming guy. So the Boston Bruins, after seeing him go from 51 points to 40 points, they decided to make a deal with Florida. And with Florida, Reilly Smith got dealt alongside Mark Savard and his terrible contract to the Boston Bruins in exchange for Jimmy Hayes. Now, I'm not going to really say much about Jimmy Hayes because he unfortunately passed away. Rest in peace to Jimmy Hayes. I will say with Mark Savard, he had a career-ending injury. They were trying to get rid of his contract. Reilly Smith was a part of it. later on, that's going to become a reoccurring theme with Reilly Smith. Him being dealt in order to take a bad contract off another team's hands. So, Reilly Smith gets dealt from Boston after 2 years and goes to Florida. And how did his tenure in Florida go? It was another 2 seasons, but it was an impactful 2 seasons for Reilly Smith. In 2015, 2016, his first season playing for Florida, they have gone heavily into analytics at this point, and he had his first 25-goal season. And in fact, he had a double-double as 25 goals, 25 assists, was back to the 50-point mark for the Florida Panthers, and he actually had 8 points in 6 playoff games. So Reilly Smith, already in his career, 51 points in 2013, 2014, 40 points in 2014, 2015, then went back to 50 points in 2015, 2016. Reilly Smith was already establishing himself before he even got to Vegas. He was establishing himself as at the least a 40-point scorer, but at the most a 50-plus point scorer in the NHL. And that's a valuable asset you can have in hockey. To find a guy who averages half a point per game, that is incredibly rare in the NHL. A lot of people don't get the opportunity to be that consistent in the NHL. So Reilly Smith, he's a few years into his career at this point, and he wants to get paid. All right, he wants to get paid. He was taken by Peter Reilly with the Boston Bruins. He signed that massive contract, then went over to Florida. So that season, he wanted to get a long-term deal. And to get a long-term deal, he most definitely did. In fact, it was the contract that Reilly Smith actually had when he got here to Vegas. So the Florida Panthers signed Reilly Smith to a 5x5, $5 million for 5 years. And I think that was an excellent deal by Florida because it most definitely benefited your Vegas Golden Knights in the long-term future. I also want to keep in mind his contract was front-loaded. So the first 2 years, he was making about $6 million. Year 3, about $5 million. Year 4 was $4.5 million. In his last year, he was making $3.5 million. I mean, keep in mind, when he signed that 2-year deal with Boston, he was making about $3.5 million. So Reilly Smith, for majority of his career in the NHL, has either been $3.5 million or more as a professional hockey player. For reference, when he signed that contract with Joe Nieuwendyk as a member of the Dallas Stars, he was only making roughly $900,000 as a rookie, and that was bumped up to $1.4 million in that final year before he got that deal from Peter Reilly. So for Reilly Smith, this was a valuable contract for him to have that 5-year deal for the Florida Panthers. And in year 2, Reilly Smith actually did worse. He went from a 25-goal scorer to a 15-goal scorer. And instead of getting about 50 points, he had his worst season of his career. He only had 37 points for Florida. I also want to keep in mind he had a negative 13 plus minus that year in Florida in 2016-2017. Now, there are going to be people who are going to make an argument that his dip in production is why Florida gave him up. His negative 13 plus minus was a reason why he got dealt to Vegas. Him only getting 15 goals is why he got flipped to Vegas. And you know what I'm going to say here is that if that was the case, if his dip from 25 goals to 15 goals is why he became a Vegas Golden Knight, then you know what? It was a blessing in disguise. Because after that 2016-2017 season, the Vegas Golden Knights held their expansion draft. And during the expansion draft, the Florida Panthers gave the Vegas Golden Knights their best 2 weapons in the same draft. In the 2017 NHL expansion draft, not only did they take Jonathan Marchessault, But in order to protect another player, they also gave up Reilly Smith's contract in exchange. We now know later that it was Alex Petrovic. The defenseman, Alex Petrovic, who is now with the Dallas Stars, he was the player that Florida protected and gave up Jonathan Marchessault and gave up Reilly Smith in the deal. Because a lot of people also want to remember that Vegas gave up a 4th-round pick also to get Reilly Smith. So essentially what it was a 4th-round pick, and to not take Alex Petrovic, the Vegas Golden Knights got Jonathan Marchessault and got Reilly Smith. They also had to take on all $5 million of that contract. So at the time, people were saying if he scored 15 goals again, he would not be living up to that $5 million base salary. He would not be living up to the $6 million that he would be playing on those first 2 years. Well, how exactly did Reilly Smith play in his first season here in Vegas? How did Reilly Smith perform as a misfit, as a guy who rallied the city around the Vegas Golden Knights? Someone that while the city was mourning 1 October, how did the Vegas Golden Knights perform? They only performed the best season by an expansion franchise in sports history. Not only did Reilly Smith take his performance against Florida, he doubled what he did the year before. In 2017-2018, his first season playing in Vegas, he had 22 goals. I mean, that's okay. 22 goals, that's fine. That's over 20 goals again. And 60 points in Vegas. That was the best season of his career up to that point. The best season he had prior was the 51 points he had in Boston. So he went from a guy who had barely under 40 points in his last season in Florida to in his first season in Vegas had 60 points, 22 of them being goals. In that negative 13 he had in Florida, he had a plus 31 in Vegas in 2017-2018. Well, you know what? The regular season is all great. How did Reilly Smith do in the postseason? How did he do there, you might ask? Well, in 2017-2018, not only did the Vegas Golden Knights get to the Stanley Cup final, Reilly Smith was a major factor in why the Vegas Golden Knights got there. I mean, in 2017-2018, he only had 5 goals in 20 games. All right, that's a quarter. He scored a goal in pretty much 1 out of every 4 games. That's a quarter per game. But he led the entire team in points. I mean, Reilly Smith had only 5 goals, but he had a whopping 17 assists in the postseason. Reilly Smith averaged over a point per game in their run to the Stanley Cup final. It's also the same Reilly Smith that heading into that point in only 18 playoff games, Reilly Smith had 8 goals and 13 points. So Reilly Smith went from having only 8 goals and 13 points in 2 postseason appearances to shattering both of those and leading the Vegas Golden Knights with 22 points, 5 of them being goals in the 2018 Stanley Cup playoffs. And Reilly Smith doing that in year 1 was massive for Vegas. He was a vital part of that first line. All right, the MSK line, the Marchessault, Smith, Karlsson line. It was one of the best lines in hockey in 2017-2018. You also have to remember that Reilly Smith was helping the city of Vegas. He was doing a lot of things in the community. He was putting a lot of work in behind the scenes. And I think a lot of people rallied around Reilly Smith because of it. A lot of people actually supported Reilly Smith, guys like Braden McNabb, players like Jonathan Marchessault and William Karlsson, because of what they did for the community, because of what Derek England was doing for the community, because it's something that doesn't get talked about enough in sports. But there are athletes out there that when they play for a certain city, when they play for a certain franchise, certain organization, they help that city out. They help their communities out. All right, there are neighborhoods, there are sections of the area that get benefited because athletes take time out of their day, they take time out of their situation, and they help support the community. Reilly Smith was a big example of that. I think Reilly Smith is always going to be a fan favorite here in Vegas because of what he did for the community, because of all the projects and things that he was doing here in Vegas. So year one came around, best season of his career. What about year two for Reilly Smith? How is he going to perform in year two? Well, he had a slight dip in performance. So he had 19 goals, which was three less than the year before, and he had only 53 points. So once again, he was still a 50-point scorer, but he went down from about 60 to 53. That's not bad. Trust me, him only losing a couple of points during that season, he was still on the first line, still with Marchessault and Carlson, and he helped the Vegas Golden Knights get to the postseason that year. This is when they lost to the San Jose Sharks. And he actually was averaging a point per game in that series against San Jose. He had 6 points in 7 games. Year three for the Vegas Golden Knights, 19 and 20. And Reilly Smith, this was a shortened year. This was the COVID year. And in 71 games, he had his best season in terms of goal scoring, as he had 27 goals, 27 assists, racking up 54 points in 71 games. So Reilly Smith was still a 50-point scorer with the Vegas Golden Knights at this point. I also have to mention that he had 14 points in 20 playoff games as the Vegas Golden Knights made it to the Western Conference Finals just to get eliminated by Dallas. So the 2020-2021 season, that was the year that Reilly Smith started to show just a hint of decline, because this was the first year since coming to Vegas that he had less than 15 goals. This was the first season that since he had been in his NHL career that he had under 30 points in a single season, as he only had 14 goals, 25 points in 53 games that year for the Vegas Golden Knights. I also have to mention that in the playoffs that year, he had 10 points in 19 games. Not bad for someone like Reilly Smith, but wasn't the same production level that we know from him in the past. So after all of that, a lot of people expected Reilly Smith to maybe get traded, to maybe get dealt. Maybe there was an idea that he would have his contract be restructured or bought out. But instead, to kind of show a little bit of loyalty with Reilly Smith, the Vegas Golden Knights gave him a 5x3. Kelly McCrimmon gave him a 3-year contract, $15 million. And he actually will be playing the last 2 years of that contract in Pittsburgh. But I have to mention the contract real quick because, yes, he was rewarded for his loyalty. All right, Smitty was rewarded for what he did here in Vegas. So signing that 3-year contract with Kelly McCrimmon when a lot of people thought he was going to be gone kind of showed the loyalty that they had to Reilly Smith at the time. I also have to mention that in terms of the salary of that deal, he is actually on a backloaded contract. So he has a 5.75 in year one, a 5.25 in year two, and $4 million in year three. So him having a front-loaded contract and where less money's coming in on the back end, that's the situation Reilly Smith had. And I kind of don't want to mention 2022, 2021, 2022, because Reilly Smith got injured. All right, Reilly Smith only played in 56 games. He missed 26 games that year with the Vegas Golden Knights, had 16 goals, 38 points. He was doing solid before he got injured against Vegas. There's also the year that the Vegas Golden Knights missed the playoffs. We all know about it. we'll move on from that year. So 2022, 2023, the final season that Reilly Smith was a Vegas Golden Knight, and he went out with an absolute bang for Vegas because he only missed 4 games all year long. He went back up to 26 goals on the year, had 56 points for the Vegas Golden Knights, had a plus 11 for the Vegas Golden Knights in the regular season, helped them get the best record in the Western Conference, and then in the Stanley Cup playoffs against Winnipeg, against Edmonton, and against Dallas, Reilly Smith stepped up in a good way because he only had 4 goals in 22 games, but he had 10 assists and a plus 9 in the Stanley Cup playoffs that year. So 14 points in 22 games, and Reilly Smith helped the Vegas Golden Knights win a Stanley Cup championship, beating Florida and hoisting Lord Stanley Cup. And I do want to mention that Reilly Smith being in the starting lineup, having all 5 of the original Misfits be in the starting lineup in Game 5, that is something that every Golden Knights fan is going to remember. It's a moment that the players were all going to remember. And having all 5 of the original Misfits, including William Carrier because he wasn't in the starting lineup, having all of them hoist the Stanley Cup first after Mark Stone, that was pretty impressive as well. Earlier in the show, I mentioned that Reilly Smith did something for the community. I mentioned that Reilly Smith was doing something for the community, and that is the charity softball game that the Raiders and the Golden Knights do every single year. Now, the Raiders is obviously led by a Raider. We've seen Derek Carr, we've seen Darren Waller, we've seen Bo Jackson. We've seen a bunch of guys from the Raiders be on that end. But it's been consistent on the Golden Knights end. Every year, Reilly Smith has been the captain of that team when it comes to the softball game. When you have the softball game between the Raiders and the Golden Knights at the Las Vegas ballpark in downtown Summerlin, it is a fantastic event. He would bring back former Golden Knights like Ryan Reeves and Nate Schmidt. They would come back and play on the Vegas Golden Knight team. So the charity softball game, I was always a huge fan of that. Really happy that it's still going to be a thing here in Vegas. And I want to say, as someone who is a fan of Reilly Smith, as somebody that really appreciated Reilly Smith's game, he is always going to be a legend here in Vegas. And if I have to put my hat in the ring, if I have to put my 2 cents into it, I believe 1,000% that Reilly Smith will be in the Ring of Honor once the Golden Knights get long enough into the season. I truly believe that Reilly Smith, with his 6 years, with them winning a Stanley Cup, with him being part of the original Misfits, having 2 Stanley Cup Finals appearances, Reilly Smith is going to be remembered for being a Vegas Golden Knight. All right, Reilly Smith had 2 incredible seasons, and both of them were here in Vegas. So I will say to everyone watching around the world, those 2017, 2018, that 2018, 2019 season, that was the best 2 seasons of Reilly Smith's career. I mean, those are 2 years where he was having 50 and 60 points in his career. That was when Reilly Smith turned it up a notch and really became one of the best players here in Vegas. So I will say once again, to kind of wrap up this show, thank you, Reilly Smith, for your 6 seasons here in Vegas. We appreciate all you did. I wish you the best of luck in Pittsburgh, and I believe you will be in the Ring of Honor. And I will say that there's a possibility that your jersey does get retired once you retire in the NHL. So I want you to let me know what you think about Reilly Smith. This was our episode kind of giving a appreciation to Reilly Smith, his 6 seasons playing in Vegas. Good luck in Pittsburgh. I wish you the absolute best. So until next time, continue watching hockey, go support junior hockey, and go Knights, go.